I'm J. Lenore Bressler, and welcome to the June 20th, 2019 edition of the Bible Delight in the Details. If you were with us a few moments ago, you know that our broadcast was suddenly stopped. What you don't know is why. The phone became too hot. It was too hot to handle. And so we are now going to redo the presentation with its conclusion. Today, I want to play a little game with you. I'm about to read for you a one-sentence verse in the New Testament. It's very brief, and I want you to tell me which of these words do you think is the most important. Now, a little bit of context before I read it to you. This is coming from the second epistle or letter from Paul to Timothy. So we're in 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 11. This verse is not particularly famous, nor have I ever heard anyone say it's their favorite verse. And in some ways, it's repetitive of other places in his letters where Paul has identified himself in a similar way. So it's unlikely that you've heard an entire sermon or even an entire Sunday school lesson on this verse. But nonetheless, this little verse really can tell us something, I think, absolutely fascinating. So here we go from 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 11. Which of these words do you think is the most significant? For this gospel I was appointed a herald, apostle, and teacher. One more time. For this gospel, I was appointed herald, apostle, and teacher. Which word do you think is the most important? Did you say herald, or maybe apostle, or maybe teacher? Did you think perhaps, no, it's about who and how he got authority to be these things? And so you thought it was the word appointed. Or perhaps you said, no, it's got to be the word gospel. Wrong-o. The most important word in that verse is the little word this. Now you're probably thinking, what in the world? You see, it's because when we as modern hearers read that verse, we know instantly what gospel he's talking about. When people hear the word gospel today, they think it means, and they're right, that it means the life of Jesus, the story of Jesus. In fact, you don't say to someone, may I share gospel with you? You say, may I share the gospel? Even the early church had the titles of the different life stories of Jesus called the gospel according to Matthew, the gospel according to Luke, etc. So there's no question today, gospel is really treated in the modern vernacular like a proper name rather than a common noun. But in the ancient world, it was not the case. Gospel indeed means good news, as I'm sure you know, but there were many gospels, many causes of good news. But the gospel, what actually meant an official proclamation regarding the emperor or ruler. Something good had happened to him. And so there were heralds, people that were specifically charged with going out and ensuring that everyone far and wide had heard whatever the gospel of the moment was. So for example, when an emperor was crowned, then there was the gospel of his coronation. If he went out and won a big decisive battle, then there was the gospel of his winning the battle. If he had a child was born to him that was the heir apparent, then there would be the gospel of the heir apparent's birth. Interestingly, when these official proclamations were made throughout the Roman Empire, whoever heard them was expected to react. You were not to simply be apathetic or do nothing. When you heard a gospel, whatever the gospel of the moment was, you were to go into action, whether it was celebration or feasting or perhaps going and praying on behalf of the good news. Whatever it was, there was a call to action because of hearing this gospel. Now, this is why it was essential for Paul to clarify what gospel was he talking about? What gospel was he appointed to proclaim and to teach and to make sure other people could teach it as well as an apostle? It was this gospel, and in the context, we know that he's talking, of course, about the good news of Jesus Christ. Now, when we think about the gospel, we think about, well, it's the story of Jesus. And indeed, much of the story of Jesus would easily be classified as gospel according to the ancient definition. For example, Jesus' miraculous birth and the annunciation of it, and the angels to the shepherds in Bethlehem, all of the stories of Luke 2, and the coming of the Magi, and then moving forward in his life, the stories of his excellent teachings and his miraculous healings and other miracles. What would not have been an obvious gospel would be, of course, the passion, his suffering, the fact that he was betrayed, the fact that he was killed in such a brutal way by unjust men. This would not have been classified as gospel, except that there was another shoe to drop, and that was what happened on Easter morning. Yes, Good Friday by itself was not gospel, but when combined with the next chapter of the story, the resurrection, the acceptance of God, of his sacrifice, and what that means forevermore to men and women, then indeed the entire story, including his suffering, is indeed gospel. And it is this gospel that Paul said he was appointed to herald and teach and create others who could do likewise. My question to you today is, what has been your reaction? Because it was always deemed appropriate. In fact, it was considered inappropriate not to do something when you heard a gospel about the emperor or the ruler. So what has been your response? You know, one last thing. We see images of the crucifix all over. We see them on wall plaques. We see them on mugs, on refrigerator magnets, on bookmarks, and certainly around the necks of ourselves and our friends. Some of them show Christ still on the cross. This is primarily from the Catholic tradition, reminding us of Good Friday and his suffering and his sacrifice for us. Others, generally of the Protestant tradition, show a vacant cross, reminding us of the fact that suffering was accepted. It was an acceptable sacrifice, and now Jesus is resurrected. Everyone has their preference. Either one assumes the entirety of the story. So it is your preference which you prefer. I personally like the vacant cross because I love to remember that there is the gospel, the good news is not just the sacrifice. It is also the acceptance of it and the resurrection. For if it had been just the news of Good Friday, there would have been no gospel in that. It would have been a sad martyrdom of a good man. But in the light of the resurrection, it is indeed the good news of all time. I'm J. Lenore Bressler. Visit me on the next edition of the Bible, Delight in the Details. Have a marvelous day living in the understanding of the or this God.